in a very, very long time. I mean, some people were calling it as important as the budget back in 1994 for shaping our new democracy here in South Africa. Well, I can tell you one thing. The minister really did seem calm and confident yesterday when he took to that podium and announced his budget. Well, we have him with us here on the program to talk about how he feels and, of course, what he thought of the reaction afterwards. Minister, it's good to have you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, and thank you for having not only me but our team as well, and the former finance minister, Mr. Trevor Manuel, who also delivered many important budgets. So welcome him as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, let's give our minister a round of applause. Minister, were you satisfied with the reaction that you saw yesterday?
I think, well, from the little that I've seen and heard, I must thank South Africans for their goodwill and for their generosity and for understanding that I've become the new tightrope walker in South Africa. I never thought I could manage that. But it was indeed a fine balancing act, as many are saying, but one which has, I think, successfully put across a story for government, but also a story for South Africa, that we are a resilient nation, that we are, frankly, in difficult times, and more people need to understand that. And when you're in difficult times, you take the measures proactively, if you can, to ensure that you don't spend too much of money that you don't have, that you do things that will increase the money that you have, which is essentially what comes from growth in our economy. And so it's crucial that apart from what we call fiscal consolidation, which is narrowing the deficit, an important signal to the world that we are capable of reducing expenditure and, unfortunately, raising revenue as well, which is part of the balancing act that we have to perform as government. We also need to focus our minds on how do we grow the economy and how every one of the role players in our society, government, labor, business, civil society, and the public at large, can contribute to growing this economy. If we do not get above 0.9 in the next year or two, we'll have to do more of this balancing act, more of cutting expenditure, and more of raising revenue, and we're very transparent about that as well. So we've passed the first test. Now we need to walk together and pass many more tests as well, as any tightrope walker has to do.
Yeah, indeed, and a very, very tightrope you're walking on, and such a tightrope that, you know, when we were watching the reaction from parliamentarians, they seemed very happy with what you were putting forward. In fact, you got a standing ovation even from opposition parties. But at the same time, while you were speaking, we were watching the currency, and the currency wasn't necessarily liking what you were saying. I mean, we saw the currency depreciate about 2.25% during your talk. Why? What do you think the market was looking for that perhaps you didn't offer?
Well, one thing I've learned in the short time I'm in this job, 5 years plus a few weeks, it's a few weeks.
5 weeks to be exact.
is that markets have their own way of looking at life. They look for particular numbers. So if our growth comes out at 0.9, it's below where we were before, 1.3, 1.1, and we've fallen below the threshold, so to speak. But there was adequate indication from IMF estimates and from World Bank estimates that we were going to fall below 1%. But apart from that, the market should not have been disappointed. We've done all the good things that we said we would do and keep to our historical commitment that our approach to the fiscus is one which will ensure that we run the country in a sustainable way. And we've done it again.
Yeah. Minister, I'm going to ask you to just pause there for 1 second. We're going to get some news headlines, which...
That's the problem with TV, isn't it?
That is the problem. It's making you pause. It's terrible. But when we return, I'm also going to open up the floor to all of our guests that are here. We've got such a wonderful variety of guests who all have questions. And I've got my colleague, Nompumelelo Siziba, who's with me this morning, and she's going to be taking those questions for the Minister. It's a fast, it's a punchy broadcast. So let's get those news headlines, and you'll be back with us after this.
Good morning. I'm terribly sorry, Leanne, Minister, that we have to cut to headlines, but I think you'll be relieved to know that it is heavily containing your budget speech, Mr. Minister. So let's take a look at it to provide us some context to those who want to get involved in the breakfast briefing. Let's take a look at some of the facts that came out in the budget speech. Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan has presented a budget speech that has been characterized by reduction of government expenditure and cost-cutting measures. He announced an increase in spending on the social, health and education fronts. Political parties have reacted in varying ways, with the ANC
For me, the thing is pulling off two live broadcasts at the same time.
But it's good though.
I mean, if we can get over this at 9 o'clock and it's going well.
Are you saying? I thought you were saying something.
So why are they biking you? Are you going to have to get up there?
No, from time to time I suspect he says I must be Mike. I don't know what his intention is. He has this thing of throwing questions.
A romantic adventure film starring Ivan Buerta and Donnelly Roberts. The story begins in the beautiful vineyards of Paarl in the Western Cape. The adventure takes off when the characters find themselves on the tropical island of Love, Mauritius.
Josephine's work is more interesting and distinguishable. She visits war-stricken zone countries to tell the story of the damage war often leaves behind.
This particular exhibition's case, places that are named after conflict or disaster or war or reconciliation.
And basically what it is it's a collection of the best animated short films from around the world this year. And the idea is to inspire animators and directors with this exciting content. And so that's been offered to us as a cinema, and we're very excited to be screening the animated show of shows here in South Africa.
Join Refulo Mula for that 1 hour weekly dose of arts and entertainment news every Friday at 9 p.m. on Trends.
Health Talk looks into the increase of suicide and symptoms leading to suicide.
The death wish grows when you go into depression after a lot of stress.
And often when we talk about suicide, we don't talk about a person wanting to stop living, but rather wanting to stop living in pain.
After losing everything in life that lead you to no options but suicide.
I had that spirit of fear in me to say, don't even face tomorrow.
After being overwhelmed with stress and trauma, it becomes difficult to have self-control.
People learning tools and skills that will practically enable them to meet these challenges.
In trying times, never be alone. Reach out for help to a better solution.
Support should be done by a counsellor or psychologist where you're able to speak about how you're feeling in a safe, accepting, non-judgmental space.
For all your health tips, join Dr. Silo Mutawuni every Saturday from 9 till 10.
News Today takes an in-depth look on news locally, continentally, and globally. We bring the world to your home. We cover all economy news extensively to keep you informed. We are live to break news as and when they happen across the world. We analyze news using experts in all aspects. Make a date with News Today every Monday to Friday from 3 to 5:30 p.m.
Welcome back to this special broadcast, our sit-down conversation with the Finance Minister, Pravin Gordhan, after his announcement of our national budget for 2016-2017. Minister, one of the issues that I think was a great surprise to many was a lot of people were expecting increases in taxes. I mean, for the first time in our lives, we sort of listened and thought, really? Wow, this is kind of, it's good news. I mean, I'm happy as an individual, but perhaps the markets weren't too happy at the fact that VAT wasn't increased, taxes weren't increased for individuals and corporate, and perhaps felt that it was a missed opportunity to get more revenue. What are your opinions on this?
We still got the revenue, but we got it in a different way. So that's the problem with expectations. If you put your expectation on very specific things, you don't leave room for creativity. And what we had is a very creative approach where, to be frank, you did have increases because you've got less fiscal drag relief than you would normally get in our environment. In other words, we're not fully compensating for inflation in salaries by increasing the brackets on the income tax side. Secondly, there's increases in various excise taxes. There's an increase in fuel levy. And VAT in South Africa is a sensitive area which you must have very long and hard discussions amongst all the social partners so that we understand, A, why are we increasing VAT, but secondly, B, what are we doing to provide relief to the poor who will be seriously impacted if our list of, I think there are about 18 exemptions at the moment that have been there since the early 1990s, are not reviewed to be in line with modern consumption patterns. So the tax increases are there, otherwise we wouldn't be able to balance the budget.
Yeah, I suppose it's what we're calling sneaky taxes.
No, nothing sneaky, I'm talking about it.
Well, I mean, listen, paying more for a can of Coke from the 1st of April, and this is not a joke, this is real.
No, this is to actually help you. You should be paying more to us because we're looking after your health.
Yeah. What made you go so fast on this one? I mean, this is on a personal opinion, I mean, I think it's a great move to look after the health of South Africans. I mean, our obesity levels are getting out of control. But obviously, I suppose you're going to hit a little bit of backlash on this.
Not at all. This is a pattern in many developed parts of the world, most recently in Mexico as well, where factors like obesity, hypertension, diabetes, the non-communicable chronic diseases, as my colleague Minister Motsoaledi will call it, is becoming A, huge burden on society, and B, a huge burden on the health system when it begins to hurt people or affect people who use the public health system.
Yeah.
So we're balancing this act, making sure that people live more healthily, and I think we must look forward to more taxes that would ensure that our normal consumption habits change and that we lead a healthier life.
You even mentioned a salt tax.
Well, some parts of the world are doing that as well because excessive use of salt leads to hypertension for a start. I'm an ex-pharmacist, remember? So.
Yeah, all right. So South Africa, we're in trouble. You better eat better, otherwise it's going to cost you more. Let's go to the floor now and let's get Labour's reaction because obviously they watch very, very closely and I'd be really interested to see what Tony Arenroth thinks. Tony, it's good to see you. What's your question for the Minister or your comments on yesterday's budget?
Good morning, Comrade Minister. Firstly, congratulations on the budget. We certainly think it's an encouraging balance. Thank you very much for not raising VAT, because that certainly, I think, would have added more difficulties to the poor. The area that I want to pose a question to is in relation to the point that you've just made. We're not going to see the kind of growth in the short term that we want, but we've got to increase the money that's available to spend. one of the areas to get that is to tax the wealthier more. And that's probably the budget's one of the key ways in which the government can reduce the levels of inequality. So we'd like to see a bit more taxes on the upper incomes. They're not at the levels yet that they're paying under apartheid, and a bit more expenditure on the social grants. The social grants increases has been, I think, around 4 or 5%. And for poor people, we'd want to see a bit more. So just some comments on that, on how we're going to use the budget to address some of that. But otherwise, I think on balance, we're very encouraged by it. Thank you.
That's the most encouraging comments that Tony has made at these breakfast sessions. So that's a good start. But thank you very much.
We won't tax him on his sugar this morning.
Thank you very much.
Nice one, Tony.
On taxing the wealthy, it's a direction that we need to go on. Minister Nene did increase taxes by 1% last year, if you remember. Fiscal drag, as I said, is an indirect taxation as well. We have capital gains tax, and transfer duty has been increased as well. And the whole question of wealth taxes, inverted commas, is something that the Davis Tax Committee is looking at as well. And the second point is that we must take a 3-year view. This is not just a 1-year view. And we've said very clearly that in the outer years we also need to bring in revenue of 15 billion rands in each of the 2 years of the 3-year cycle that we are talking about. So don't use all of your gunpowder if you used to Western movies immediately, and take a broader view of that. We seem to concur on VAT, but that's a discussion that we need to have. On the question of social relief, we still are amongst the best spenders on the social wage in the world. And the burden that we have from our past is not going to be easily overcome. The last time I remember calculating this, or being given a calculation, we were spending 57% of non-interest expenditure on the social wage, housing, education, health, social grants, etc. The next is we need to appreciate that there are two pressures on the expenditure side, and that is the increasing interest that we're paying on the debt. And by leveling off debt at about 46%, we hope that that interest bill begins to decline in the outer years. In Minister Manuel's time, this was a similar problem in the 1990s as well. So we've got to reduce the debt, we've got to reduce the borrowing, we've got to reduce the interest that we are paying so that we create more space for both social relief but also support to the economy. The second pressure is the compensation budget, which has also been growing phenomenally in the last few years. And you've heard our announcements about how, in a fairly modest way at this point in time, we are trying to curtail that budget, because that's also imposing pressure where the public service is absorbing a significant, over 400 billion rands of the 1.3 billion rands that we're spending in the new financial year. And until we resolve those two issues, we're going to have to curtail expenditure, unless, Mr. Ehrenreich, the labor movement and business and government begin to agree on a growth pact for South Africa. That's the key. If we can't grow our economy, we can't spend money. We can't borrow in an environment where people begin to doubt our ability to repay, which is what the rating story is all about, although it's more than just that at this point in time. So we need to shift our conversation, all of us, to a more serious discussion about how do we find some common ground amongst us, given the different ideological, philosophical, and mindsets or views that we come from, and say, where's the common ground that we can agree as quickly as possible? How do you take this economy to 3%, 5% that it needs to get to? And I think if we can commit ourselves to that, we would have done South Africa a huge service, and in particular future generations.
Minister, I'm going to cross to Nompumelelo, who I know has got another question for us. Nompumelelo?
Much, Leanne. I wanted to approach Cascavadier. I did warn him ahead of time. You're a finance man. You're the chief at the Banking Association of South Africa. Do you have a comment or a question that you might want to pose?
Thanks. No, I've been railroaded into this, by the way. Look, firstly, on the budget, I think that we need to look at the context. The economics we've talked about, slow growth, rating agencies, unemployment, and the other social problems. The minister also said toward the end of his speech yesterday that the politics are tough. And so it was a tough environment in which to do the budget. I think at the broad headline levels, I think the minister touched on the critical issues that needed to be touched. Growth, working together, government expenditure, fiscal consolidation, a lot of work on the SOEs and merging, for instance, SAA and SA Express, governance in SOEs, and as well as mandates of SOEs. So I think the right stuff was touched on. I think, to me, there are a couple of critical issues. I agree with the minister that we need to come together as social partners and agree on a growth path and what sort of growth we're going to have. And I think the recent business interactions with government, I think certainly from a business point of view, we are beginning to talk, and we've started talking to labor unions about that as well. To me, one of the critical issues is that while the social parties need to get together to do this and to begin to talk and reach a common sort of purpose, I think what's also needed is now government needs to get behind this budget. This isn't the minister's budget, this is the government's budget and the country's budget. And I think that we would certainly want to see a sort of marching orders for government to actually say we need to take the hard decisions, we need to implement the hard stuff. And if we don't do that, the social compacts aren't going to work.
Okay. Any comments on that, Minister? Was that
agreed? Government is behind the budget, otherwise I wouldn't be standing there yesterday.
Good. Minister, let's talk about state-owned enterprises, because you made a big statement that there will be no more bailouts, and that's just the way it is. A lot of people were hoping for perhaps more on the privatization issue, something that we've been trying to avoid. But let's talk more about that, because you almost opened up the door a bit with SAA.
Yeah, privatization has become a dirty word in South Africa. Because there's a view amongst quite a significant majority that state assets shouldn't just be got rid of, that state assets should be utilized for developmental purposes, that state assets in the hands of the state means assets in the hands of the people. Now, in nominal terms, that's fine, but we're also finding that state assets can be captured by all sorts of interests as well. And then they begin to lose their way. But more importantly, what we, I think, are trying to communicate to the South African public of all political hues is that we are in an environment where we don't have enough money, for example, to continue to contribute 2 or 3 billion rands a year to keep SAA flying. So, in the first instance, we're saying, why all these multiple brands? Bring them together. Why do you have so many boards? Bring them together. Sorry to people for my apologies to people who make their money from sitting on boards. But we can't afford this kind of duplication. In the second instance, we need to mobilize all the capital we can get, and yet not just dispose of state assets in a willy-nilly way without getting a proper conversation in South Africa. Historically, we've had disposal of what we call non-core assets anyway. More recently, we've sold as government Vodacom shares to the PIC, and that's a disposal of a state asset. And more importantly, there are also, let's call it non-private sector entities that have funds at their disposal, whether they are private foundations, trade union investment companies, and we don't care where the money comes from, but if we can crowd in that money, begin to get some level of co-investment or equity participation, as we said we would try to do in respect of the airline, then we're beginning to move a step forward and not being strangled by the current environment. And there are opportunities that we need to seize, both as government and the private sector, and perhaps as government and the trade union movement as well. Let some of that money that we talk about ideologically be now utilized in the developmental context. And hopefully in 6 months' time we can produce some results in this area.
All right, let's get another question from our audience. From
I want to just say that Deputy Minister Jonas is also here, and I still enjoy powers of delegation. So
feel free to delegate at any time.
And well, obviously, the Minister was speaking to a number of stakeholders, and obviously we'll be also looking to get foreign reaction to the Minister's budget. So we have the German ambassador with a comment.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to congratulate for gathering so many people, high-ranking people at this time of the day. In Germany, the German finance minister would not dare to invite people for 6 o'clock. I'm happy. It shows how many people are interested in it. Well, my question is a simple one. We have listened to your speech yesterday. We have listened to the president's speech, and the focus was in both speeches, of course, on the economy, how to avoid downgrading, how to attract more investors. Do you have anything in addition to that to say to foreign investors, like German companies, 600 in the country, many of you drive German cars? What do you tell to the BMWs of this world? Should they come here and produce more? Any additional recommendations you have? Thank you.
Well, firstly, let's thank BMW for the 6 billion rands that they're about to invest in South Africa. And that, I think, is a vote of confidence in the South African economy and in the South African government and people as well. Secondly, Africa still remains uncharted territory and an area of opportunity, notwithstanding the decline in growth in the last year or so. And South Africa has the most sophisticated business infrastructure. That's why they get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. They're very hard-working people. And that should be acknowledged by our foreign friends as well. And anybody who wants to, either in the financial sector or other sectors, operate within the African context, will find that South Africa has a lot to offer. We need to do a lot more, have more skilled people, have better infrastructure in terms of connectivity with the rest of the continent, but many of those are at an advanced stage in terms of conceptualization, planning, and hopefully soon implementation as well. What one would discourage is these ebbs and flows in mood in the developed world. It's like, I was going to use the example of a tie. It's a narrow tie, broad tie, then a broader tie, then a narrow tie. And the fashion keeps changing in respect of perspectives on emerging markets. And those changes in perspective, as you will see during your stay in South Africa, begin to hurt emerging markets. These massive flows of capital in and out, depending on what the Fed does or doesn't do or says or doesn't say, is something that, as I said today, the G20 will be meeting tomorrow and the day after in Shanghai, and beginning to discuss as well. So the developed world must see the emerging markets or developing world as their partners. And we are the future market, if not the current market as well. As you said, I don't know, I suppose many, but not all, drive German cars of one kind or another, or German-made cars. But we would also say make more of those cars in South Africa, so that we import less and export more to the African market as well, because there's a growing middle class in Africa that could benefit your companies in the medium term, if not in the short term. Thank you.
Minister, I know you're going to leave. Just one final question, and I have to also bring our viewers into the conversation because they're asking questions as well. One of the biggest questions that they're asking is, as much as we want to cut costs, and that's something that you spoke about quite a lot, many people are critical about the size of our government and the size of cabinet, the fact that there's so many ministers and how much it's actually costing South Africa and the burden on our economy. There was no real mention of this.
A finance minister will be fired if he says I'm cutting the cabinet.
But what are your views on this? Do you not think that it is too heavy? I wouldn't want to get you fired. We don't want to go through that again.
No, that's the prerogative of the president. And in our constitutional system, he determines how to get various forms of representation done in the context of constituting a cabinet. And I think he would be the best person to respond to that critical question, which I see increasingly people ask. But if you actually look at the numbers, the size of the cabinet is more a symbol that we are looking at. It doesn't take up billions of rands. If you talk about the issue of Parliament moving from Cape Town, you're talking about billions of rands. Don't curse me for that, please. But there are bigger issues that we need to actually tackle. But I think symbolism is an important factor in public conversation, and it's one that as a country we must debate. And I'm sure the President will take note of it at some stage.
Minister, thank you for your time. We're going to let you go. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
All the best. I know you've got lots ahead of you today, but please, everybody, a round of applause for our Finance Minister, Mr. Kevin Gordon. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, stay tuned to Morning Live. We are going to continue this broadcast, and we're going to have a conversation with our Deputy Minister of Finance now, just to continue talking about some of the issues that came out of the budget yesterday. I know that there are a lot of people in the room as well that would still like to ask some questions and get some clarity on some of those things that were raised during our budget. So stay tuned to Morning Live.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Yes, we'll go back to Leanne in a moment or two with a number of stakeholders gathered there as well. Nompumelelo is among them. She's got the roving mic and she's speaking to some industry players there and captains of industry to find out what they thought of the budget 2016. Let's take a look at this. Now, if you would like to get involved, share your thoughts. I know Leanne has been reading a number of those tweets. Our Twitter handle is Morning Live SABC. So that's at Morning Live SABC. But if you prefer this, and, you know, between the two of us, I also do prefer the good old-fashioned SMS. Please share your thoughts on the 2016 budget speech. SMS your comments to the number 33726. I'm going to repeat that. 33726. Each SMS costs R1.50. We'll be reading those SMSs for you. Any questions, any comments, any suggestions, anything at all that you'd like to get off your chest regarding budget 2016, perhaps some insight also on what the minister should have said, in your opinion. They're always welcome. Do SMS us. 33726 is our SMS line. Let's take a quick ad break. More when we return. Stay with us.
Technology isn't all scary. There's also fun stuff like gaming.
Lots of women do play games, whether it's on their phones or their tablets.
Then there are Africans who are using new tools to make other people's lives much easier.
We typed the whole CV on a small, QWERTY Nokia phone.
For all these and other technology and social media news, join me, Spumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time on SABC News.
For victory requires intense effort and teamwork. When you get to it, there is no turning back, because all eyes are on you. When it's action time, nothing should stand in your way. Sports Live tackles and analyzes all the sport action. This is the home of all your sport news, updates and more. Sports Live weekdays at 8:30 p.m.
Vera Ephraim defied family and traditions to follow her dream.
Decided that I'm going to prove to them that they were wrong.
The first breakthrough came in when she was studying and touring in Europe.
That was my first breakthrough.
Generations was her first television debut in South Africa.
It was my first gig. I was very excited. I was very happy. I said, yeah, this is confirmation I'm at the right place.
After pain, rejection, and suffering, her dream became a reality.
I followed my path, and I'm happy and grateful and blessed.
Join your host, Puleng Mulabati, on Rupilong every Friday at 17:30.
I'm sorry, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, we have been banned.
It didn't happen to me on that day, because I was already in jail when it happened.
I was scared that when I get back to Joburg, I was going to be arrested. Well, I wasn't. Who are you asking? You're looking at me?
Yes, Zubaydah, I'm talking to you.
So the old fuddy-duddies like Dennis and me will remain there?
I just want to say, Joe, that the thing about... damn, go on, and it's coming back to me.
So much more than just the Legal and Rights Show. Join Dumile Mateza every Sunday at 2 p.m. only on the SABC News channel.
Welcome back, everybody, in conversation with our finance department about the budget 2016, and it was announced yesterday, and we're trying to get the reaction in general from South Africans, from the market, and from some of our guests that have gathered here in the room. Well, one thing that certainly was a big issue last year, and that is now a massive issue this year, is that of education. And we did see yesterday the announcement that an extra, let's look at the number, 16 billion rand is going to be given to higher education. I'm sure a fund that our higher education minister is very happy with, but we're still looking at a lot of dissent amongst our students. In fact, what's happening around the country is very, very disheartening, but that is not something really we can talk about here at this podium. But we want to talk about higher education and education. But replacing our minister had to run off to another engagement, but we have got the deputy minister with us, SABC Jonas. It's good to have you, Minister. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
All right, so I'm going to throw you straight into the deep end because this is a big
already
issue.
there.
Good, I'm glad. In fact, I'm not going to ask the question, and that's how I'm going to defer it to one of our guests in the audience, a young girl who's joined us from Herschel Girls. She's got the microphone. Good morning to you. I believe it's Alison.
Yeah, concerning yesterday's budget speech, we just want to know how is yesterday's example, the taxes on the luxury goods, it's going to it's affecting the minority, but how is that going to help the poor? Because the gap between the wealthy and the poor is still so great. And if yesterday's luxury taxes are going to affect the wealthy, the poor is going to just maintain their current standard of living because everything is still remaining at a normal fixed rate for them. How is that going to help bridge the gap? Because it's not benefiting them, it's just helping them maintain. So what is going to be done to help sort of bridge the gap in the economy? Because the majority of South Africa is still living in poverty. And if the tax is only on the minority, how is that going to close the gap that the economy is currently experiencing?
Yeah, nice issue to bring up there, Alison. Although not necessarily, but at the end of the day, it actually has got to do with everything. It's this big inequality gap. Let's address it.
You see, the discussion about tax is an important discussion, but it's always important that we link it with the expenditure side. Because sometimes you tax because you want to create revenue so that the revenue is spent to address some of the problems that we face in the economy and socially. And so the way of looking at the budget is looking at it holistically. What are we saying about education? What are we saying about training and skills development? What are we saying about growing the economy, etc.? And that's what determines the quality and impact of our spend and the quality and impact of taxes on society, largely speaking. And if you look at the bias that we have, there's a lot of bias in our expenditure patterns to address inequality through a number of initiatives from training, SME development, and a whole range of other interventions in that regard. But there's also equally very important bias on education itself, by the way. And I think our challenge moving forward is going to be how do we improve education outcomes? And the only way to do that is shifting focus to schools and improving school management, improving the actual input into the schools, etc., and shifting the balance away from what traditionally is the case, where the focus is on bricks and mortar.
All right. Another question from the floor. We'll say, there you are. All right. Who have you got with you now?
He's a director at Adenco. It's a construction firm. Please make your comments, sir.
Thank you. First of all, Deputy Minister, well done on a budget intervention which probably was very, very well received. I've got one question with regards to the intervention into the merger of SAA and SA Express. I think, again, congratulations on that. But what I think you termed minority participation in SOEs, what are you hoping to achieve with that, as opposed to privatization?
Can I just say that, I mean, the debate about SOEs and where we're going, probably it's a debate that as South Africans we must engage with more in depth. And I think at the moment that probably we are entering that debate by introducing these measures. What is very clear is that you cannot continue with the current method and systems of looking at SOEs. Because by and large, I mean, all of them, if you look at them and analyze them quite in depth, do need serious recapitalization. We need to put more money in some of them. Some of them have even lost their focus and mandate. So broadly speaking, the conversation should be, what are some of those things that we should do directly as government, and what are some of those things that we should continue to do through state-owned enterprises? The second element of that is that we need to agree on forms of private sector participation in these entities. There is a review process led by the Presidential Review Commission, and it proposes a number of interventions. And for us, I think, as South African, we need to move away from this debate about state versus private and actually look at what it is that needs to be delivered, how best can it be delivered. If it's best delivered through private sector, let it be. I mean, if it's best, it can be best delivered through the state, let it be. I think we're still locked in this dichotomy and dualism of the state versus private. By and large, I think if you think about it, that these are two sides of the same coin ultimately. Obviously, the focus should be on the services that we want to deliver, how efficiently we deliver those services, how we manage cost, and how we ensure that all South Africans benefit from the services. By the way, I think I always find it strange, because if you talk to all SOEs, where do they get their money? They borrow in markets. So they borrow from the private sector anyway already. That's a reality. Who delivered most of their capital projects? Probably 90% of what we put into these SOEs get delivered through private sector. So the benefit that you have at the moment is actually private sector getting the large benefit without taking any risk. We need to change the model as we go along and allow a context where we share risks. And the only way to share risk is ensuring that there is some equity in some instances. In some instances, you kind of share operations and etc. Different models. But as the minister was saying, the principle is maintaining state control and state ownership. But you can do a lot of things. And there are many models throughout the group that show that. And that's the conversation. And it's not a theoretical conversation, I must say. It's a practical thing. We have to respond practically to the challenge. So we need a bit of more of pragmatism on these issues as opposed to ideological positioning.
Right, some more questions. We've got just about 2 more minutes left on the show. Let's get one on Puleo.
Sure, Leanne. We have Anthea Gardner.
Good morning, Deputy Minister. In an economy that's so stressed, and with the lower and middle income coming under pressure, rising inflation rates, we certainly appreciate the 5.5 billion rand in tax relief. However, could you give us an update on the NHI project and potentially if we could expect in the next budget to see an allocation to it?
That's a big question. I'm glad you touched on that one. All right, let's talk on this.
I must say that there is a bit of allocations already in the current budget for the pilot areas already. But I think the minister outlined the process. I mean, the NHI paper is already out for public comment. And hopefully that as that comes back, action and process in government will be initiated to decide how to take it forward. Crucially important in that debate is the financing of it. I mean, is it whether you are going to finance it through raising additional taxes, how are we going to finance this thing, or changing or reprioritizing projects? And that's the conversation that is already taking place, and it will be out in the public. Both with all of these issues, whether it's education, NHI, or nuclear for that matter, the fundamental question that as South African we must continuously ask ourselves, firstly, is what are our choices? What choices do we want to make? Do we want to sacrifice this in exchange for this one? Because if we go a particular route, we must understand there are consequences, there are opportunity losses in that case. So we might say that we go for nuclear or whatever choice we make, or NHI. Ultimately, we must confront the reality that our resources are limited. Ultimately, we'll have to decide whether we spend these resources in one choice or the other. That's broadly speaking. The education thing with students in higher education has opened up the broad debate in any case. Yeah. And maybe we should get into that direction to say, broadly speaking, where do we want to focus as South Africans our resources? Remember that we are also tying future generations into these things. Well, it's not just about now. I mean, the amounts of resources we want to invest in these things mean that we're tying future generations into the decisions that we take today. What is morally permissible? I mean, what is ethically permissible? And that's probably the questions that we need to begin to ask. And we need a more critical and active citizenry in these things now, so that it's not a matter of government deciding alone, but we open up these things so that society decides and make inputs on these things.
And certainly society is talking, if we can see what's happening at universities. But, I mean, I think the good news to come out of the budget, and just emphasizing this, is that over the next 3 years, government plans to spend 93.1 billion rand on universities. I mean, that was the amount given. So government is listening, and that's a big thing. We, unfortunately, have to leave it there. I know that it's almost leaving you hanging, but I think we touched on some of the most important and most critical issues that came out of the budget yesterday. Well, we're going to leave you with this insert. We got a lovely opinion from some of our foreign investors here from Germany, but we've got this insert that actually came in from as far afield as Russia. They were watching, and they had an opinion too. So take a look at this, and then we'll go back to the Joburg studios.
Being partners in the BRICS agreement, South Africa and Russia saw bilateral trade drop by a whopping 11% in the first 10 months of 2015. South Africa is sending a large trade delegation to Russia next week to try to drum up business, with the CEOs of over 35 South African companies expected, as well as representatives from the government heading here. But almost half of South Africa's exports to Russia are fresh fruit and crop, which gets shipped in through the port of St. Petersburg, so the delegation is actually heading there instead of coming here to Moscow. South Africa has a trade deficit of around 2 billion rand with Russia, so we'll be looking to increase exports as much as possible when they come. But the Russian economy isn't doing so great right now. A 70% drop in global oil prices played a large part in a 3.7% contraction in GDP here in Russia in 2015. Russia, as a British country, on the other hand, will also welcome South Africa opening the Africa Regional BRICS Development Bank in Johannesburg next month, which could prove a useful tool in bilateral trade, with both the ruble and the rand struggling on international currency exchanges. Jack Parrick, SABC News, Moscow.